Okay, welcome to uh Public Enemies, lecture 1. What's going on here? Sorry, I have some screen issues. So I'm gonna share my PowerPoint with you guys. A lot of these slides I'm gonna maybe touch on, run through pretty fast. This is not an end all be all. You need to be looking at the other resources and take a look at the PowerPoint so you can process on your own time as well. But this will just be a lecture to kind of kick things off. So this is not the comprehensive everything you need to know. It's my favorite topic, so I want you to hear my voice on it. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So piracy, thievery on the high seas or on the internet. One of the reasons that they have so much in common is that both the high seas and the internet have little regulation. Obviously the seas have much more regulation, well, and the internet than it used to. But these are two areas where government control is limited and in some cases non-existent, and that's where piracy kind of blossoms. So definition of piracy, at least on the high seas, we are not discussing internet piracy. I don't consider them to be public enemies in the same form that we're talking about. So piracy is an act of robbery or criminal violence by ship or boat-borne attackers upon another ship or coastal area, typically with the goal of stealing cargo or other valuable goods. They are called pirates. The things they are used, or the vessels, are called pirate ships, and piracy is the name of the specific crime under international and many municipal laws as well. So I'm going to go this pretty quickly. One of the areas, like you can tell where the big where piracy is very popular, is places that have narrow channels that funnel into predictable shipping routes and whose geographic structures could be the best places where pirates could attack. And so we'll go over that, a few of those here now. So the Straits of Gibraltar, this is over on the other side of the world in the Mediterranean. As you can see, you'll probably need to get from this area into the Mediterranean Sea to trade along these coastlines. And so an enterprising pirate would hide along this area and try to catch you here where you um, so that they can take your ship and your cargo, because they know you've got to go through this little narrow lane to get to where you're going. So you don't have a choice. You have to face the pirates. This is another one. This is the Strait of Malacca, or however you say that, is another. If you're trying to get from this area, to Singapore, which is right there, we've got all of these things. So it's another area where piracy. Madagascar, the Mozambique Channel is another very, very popular place for piracy. The Gulf of Aden, or Aden, I'm not really sure how to say that as well. As you can see, is another geographical location. The English Channel was a pretty big place for piracy. Much how do I put this? Probably much earlier than the golden age of piracy. I would say by the golden age of piracy, which is the 1700s through 1730 or so. But prior to that, as England was becoming England and France was becoming France, this is where pirates also played. So a little bit of historical beginnings. I'm actually going to skip some of this because, well, I'm going to talk about this little bit right here. So in a pre-classical era, ancient Greeks condoned piracy as a valuable valuable profession. It was very much like as they would consider it hunting and gathering. I mean, there were resources. You went out to get those resources one way or the other, and bring it back. There's also perfectly normal references to it in Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey. The abduction of women and children to be sold into slavery was a very common practice among pirates. I believe, like, the Romans had to deal with pirates. So Julius Caesar was kidnapped and briefly held by Sicilian pirates. At one point, they finally uh, started to deal with pirates through naval warfare. So even the Romans had to deal with pirates. The European piracy kind of starts with the Frisian pirates who fought against the Holy Rome, the King of Spain, basically. Moorish pirates operated in southern France and northern Italy. The Frisians, though, were very much known as pirates. The Moors, by the 14th century, are another group of famous pirates. And then Irish pirates actually sided with the Scots, the Vikings, the Picts, and the Welsh in their invasion of England. Actually just read a book about that, but the Vikings themselves were very much considered to be pirates. In fact, going Viking is a term. Like, that's basically, if you're going Viking, you're going to raid somebody else for resources and bring it back to your home. So Viking is definitely piracy. Another thing I want to point out, if you don't know, Viking is actually, even though I have it down here and I really shouldn't, Vikings really aren't a specific ethnicity. You can't really be part Viking. You can be part Danish, part Norse. There are several other ethnicities that maybe fall under that, but Viking is actually a verb. But we're going to talk about Pirates of the New World and the first Democratic Republicans, and that's what I call them, because the pirates aren't, they're uh, they're like the first seeds of democracy that actually get brought over to the New World, and we'll talk about this. So by 1650, France, England, and the Dutch had begun their colonial empires vastly behind the country of Spain. Basically, French hunters had settled on Hispaniola and had lived there as hunters. It's kind of the same with the United States. They did eventually transition into piracy, and a lot of it had to do with the Spanish efforts to wipe them out. They basically went to the offshore island of Tortuga, and were able to, so really it's about 1650 when Tortuga becomes a thing, because that's an island where they're going basically to hide from the Spanish at this point, and do their operations from there. And this is, so the Spanish Main and the Caribbean Pirates Haven. Hispaniola, over here is this island. Tortuga is this island up here. As you can see, it's much smaller. And so we've got Jamaica here as another pirate. But basically all of these ports that we see here, like, there is massive shipping all through these regions. A lot of it's Spanish, but not just. There's English and French and Dutch here, of course. And so the whole, like, this is a beautiful place for pirates to operate, because there's all of these narrow islands. You have all of these ports with all of this trade going on. And so there's a lot of booty and treasure and resources here that you can take from lesser armed vessels than you, or some unarmed vessels, depending on how rich the shipper was. So the growth of Tortuga, like I said, was part of the English capture of Jamaica from Spain. Um, if you needed a letter of marque, was is basically it was a government authorized license that allowed a person to attack a vessel of a nation at war with the issuer. And so that video, and there's a little document I have about the War of Spanish Succession. Um, so prior, this kind of starts now where we're fighting off the Spanish. And so people were going to the English government and getting a letter of marque, which was basically permission to attack Spanish ships, take their good, and sell it for their own profit. Um, and so at first, it was okay. A new phase of piracy began in the 1690s, as English pirates began to look beyond the Caribbean for treasure. This is actually when we kind of start a little bit going over into Madagascar, but getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Um, uh, Port Royal suffered, which is on the island of Jamaica, suffers an earthquake in 1692, which also kind of sends the pirates in a different direction. And eventually, basically, the point here is we actually had signed peace treaties in Europe, and so we're taking away the the letters of marque. Now the Navigation Acts that get passed by England's Parliament basically starve the pirates. It restricts trade with foreign ships, and it kind of makes it very difficult. So how do I explain this? So we've taken away this piracy issue, and we've passed these navigation acts, which does restrict trade. And so if you're a merchant or you're a colony governor across the ocean, you're probably needing coin. And these pirates are bringing in money. They're coming in, they're selling goods, they're paying bribes. And so the 1690s when we actually start kind of really getting the kickoff of the golden age of piracy. Um, the general history of robberies and murders of the most notorious pirates is where we get most of this information. A lot of it is believed to be untrue or to at least have been embellished considerably. Um, but this is a lot of the only information that we have about some of these people. India. I'm not going to talk about India. That's just a little bit. I don't know time. Check that out though. The Indian Ocean was a richer, more tempting target at the time. And so a lot of, like I said, during the 1690s, we kind of moved our stuff over to India, and we're dealing with like attacking the East India Company ships over there. Madagascar, so 1680 and 1725 was another pirate stronghold. But like I said, I'm kind of sticking, for the purposes of this class, I'm sticking to the Caribbean pirates as we know them. There's actually also something called Libertalia, which is supposedly where it was kind of a pirate colony, likely to be a myth. But the idea was that people of all colors, creeds, and beliefs were allowed to be free of any scrutiny. They were vigilant guardians of the people's rights, and they would stand as barriers against the rich and the powerful. They were against the authoritarian institutions of their day, which included monarchies, slavery, institutional religion, and the abuses that are associated with wealth. And so, like I said, a lot of this was probably a myth, but it was still that idea that we can have a a commune of people who are all treated equally and don't need to have the institutions that are governing the world in the 1700s. So the Bahamas. The Bahamas is basically the base for pirates in the Caribbean. And so the island, Grand Cayman Island, Nassau is really ends up becoming the capital of all of this. And so the first inhabitants were the Lucayans, who arrived from other Caribbean islands. They became slaves when the Spanish arrived. No gold was found, and most of the Spanish, or most of the natives, had killed or been shipped off by the Spanish to work in other islands that were actually lucrative. And so the Bahamian Islands were abandoned by the Spanish. New Providence Island by 1966 was its most populous island. The capital, like I said, was Nassau. It was originally named Charlestown, but got burned to the Spanish, or burned to the ground by the Spanish in 1863. It got laid out and renamed Nassau by a man named Nicholas Trout, who was the most successful Lord Proprietor of Nassau. The fort becomes damaged by raids by the French and the Spanish in the 1700s, and it really becomes undefensible. So there's no gold there, and without the fort, you can't really defend it. And so the military, or the British, actually abandon New Providence Island, like I said, here in 1703, which opens up the space for pirates to move in. One of the things I'm going to see if I have here, I'm actually not going to talk about Henry Avery and the father of piracy for the purposes of this lecture. Please read these slides on your own. Basically, I want to go straight to the golden age of piracy. And so there's a movie or a show called Black Sails. Recommend it if you haven't seen it, if that's your thing. But the show starts off where they're pulling up to New Providence Island, and person who had never been there before asks, "Who does this island belong to?" And the guy goes, "Us," because it was been abandoned by all the European countries, and so it created a space for people to come in and operate. So it kind of created a zone of freedom. Nassau was in an authoritarian absolutism age. Really, the golden age of piracy really only lasted fully for 10 years. At the time, there was about 20 to 30 pirate captains, a few thousand crewmates. Mostly were English or Irish. But there were Scottish, French, Dutch, African, Danish, Swedish, and Native American pirates as well. Their crews were made up of just normal slavers, but also indentured servants and runaway slaves. And so it was kind of a place for everyone. Why did they become pirates? And this is probably where I'm actually going to end this lecture, and then allow you to kind of look over the rest of this, and let me know if you have any questions. So what was happening in Europe at that time? So we're actually seeing the breakdown of the feudal system. And by that, the feudal system was, you had a lord, and then you had peasants. And the peasants worked the land, and they paid tribute to the lord, and the lord likewise paid tribute to whoever, like say he was a baron, he'd pay tribute to an earl or maybe even a duke. And the breakdown of that basically meant that we had all of these peasants that needed jobs. Because what ended up having was commercial farming, actually commercial agriculture, where they just fenced off the property and paid people to work it, instead of having, each family run its own little plot. Really changes the dynamics in Europe. And we have a lot of people crowding to the cities. And so I should have press gang. Yeah, I have press gangs here. So you have a lot of people that are flocking to the cities that, after the breakdown of the feudal system. And so in order to, England's at war trying to fill its navy. And so in order to fill this personnel quota that we have to have, there was actually these things called press gangs. And they would go and snatch young men or boys off the street and make them serve aboard British merchant or naval vessels based on whatever was needed. Violence and oppressive rule made sailors defect from the Navy, or many merchant ships. The captain was an absolute dictator. On board ship, he had complete control. He could kill sailors on a whim and nothing would be said about it. Runaway slaves were drawn to pirate ships because many times they were offered a place on the crew, as well as they attacked slave ships. There were also political motivations. Many British were still fighting the Glorious Revolution, which was actually the fight between Catholicism and Protestantism in England in the 1680s. And so there were actually some people that believed that that they were actually fighting the English by attacking English ships and taking their goods, that we were going to secretly get James the First or James the Second back on the throne. Some, I believe, just used it as an excuse. There's a man named Charles Vane, whose history says that he might have been a Jacobite. A Jacobite is a name for a pirate that claimed he was doing it to put a Catholic back on the throne. For me, I think Charles Vane used it as an excuse. Supposedly, Governor Archibald Hamilton of Jamaica was a Jacobite and claimed that's why he funded several pirate expeditions. How did Nassau become a pirate republic? I'll let you guys read that. As I said, basically, most of the other Europeans had abandoned it. There was no law enforcement. There was no social control. And so a man named Hornigold, Benjamin Hornigold, led a former group of privateers to Nassau. His partner was named a man named Henry Jennings. That's a whole thing that this gets into. They basically picked Nassau, and settlers there eventually either adapt to the pirate lifestyle or they leave and go find somewhere else to live. This is just, like I said, another map of the area. I believe I have all of these. So I believe this here is to show you kind of the different ports that pirates could get into and the connection between I want to say Boston and Nassau. So a lot of goods from raw materials from Nassau were sold in Boston by people who weren't pirates, but people who worked with the pirates. So there was some smuggling and piracy that were funded and operated by the nobility. But really, really what sets off the golden age of piracy. I know I said I was going to stop, but I forgot how important some of this is. On July 13th, 1715, an 11-ship treasure fleet leaves Havana. They're bound for Cadiz. Due to the war that was happening in the 1700s, it had been several years since the treasure fleet had made its way to the colonies. And so these ships were filled with gold that they had mined, jewels, porcelain, and all of this was worth over 2 million pounds. I'm not sure what that is in today's dollars, but that was 2 million pounds then. And so I actually can do the calculations real quick. But so there were 10 Spanish galleons and 1 French frigate that was sailing with them, that was kind of, going back and forth. They could move a lot faster. The fleet's commander, Ubilla, was concerned because the fleet had delayed. He didn't actually want to leave. They left later and further into hurricane season than he wanted to. But the money was desperately needed by the Spanish crown after the war, and so he really didn't have a choice. So he takes off, and on the weekend of July 19th, a hurricane hits where we had a force of 50+ mile-an-hour winds, 50-foot tall waves. One by one, the ships are just driven into the Florida coast. 2 sank before they ever even hit the shore. All 10 galleons were destroyed. Only the French frigate was actually able to outrun the storm because it was smaller and obviously could move faster. And the pirates circle like sharks. So Hornigold and the other pirates go to salvage these wrecks for the treasures. Jennings decides to take the treasure from the pirates so we have pirates who are commissioned under Governor Archibald. Henry Jennings pirates is them. He had a man named Charles Vane. He actually takes a Spanish mail ship prisoner, finds out where most of the treasure is being held. Like, the Spanish are trying to salvage what they can, and they find out where these salvage camps are. They raid the camps, they bring the treasure back to Archibald. Archibald ends up getting arrested for being a Jacobite. And Jennings has to hide out. So Archibald is under the commission, I'm messing it all up. Jennings is under the commission of Archibald. And so he finds out he's taking these things. Archibald claims he's know nothing, puts it all on Jennings, though he does still get arrested. Jennings has to go hide out in Nassau. He can't be, he's an outlaw now. On the other side, Hornigold and Thatch or Teach or Blackbeard, Edward Thatch or Edward Teach, raided Spanish ships. They were still fighting. So they were actually working together. Teach was aboard one of Hornigold's ships and was a protege of Hornigold. They finally give in though and start attacking Spanish ships by the fall of 1715. And so we're not just raiding the Spanish anymore. And that is where I think I'm gonna lead it. Hornigold was kind of the leadership of the population of Nassau and the pirate island. Things do begin out of control. The pirates begin to outgrow the settlers. Hornigold refuses to take Dutch and English ships, are upsetting his crew because that's where the prize money is. He makes Thatch the captain of one of his many ships that he has taken, and builds a huge. So that is the rise of Blackbeard. We also have Sam Bellamy, who takes control of the rest of Hornigold's ships, and builds a very big pirate fleet. So these are just some of the operators. Hornigold was kind of the guy that started it. People get upset with him because they're not making any money under him. He kind of goes back to Nassau. And then we have Bellamy, who did work under Hornigold. He's kind of now in control. I'm going to let you guys kind of look and see who these men are. And that is where I'm going to leave that for now. I may do another lecture. Basically, if you have any questions about any of this, please email me, please reach out, and I'll see what I can do. So hopefully that wasn't too long and you guys can digest this, and we'll look at the resources that we have and we'll move forward from there. Thank y'all.